welcome to this. Welcome to this, the fourth of the lectures in this Wednesday lecture series. We have another very fine thinker and speaker, Ghassan Hage, who was a professor of anthropology and social theory here at the University of Melbourne. He's a fellow of the Australian Academy of the Humanities and a president of the Australian Anthropological Society. His work has been primarily on racism, nationalism, multiculturalism, particularly in Australia and the Middle East. He's written and conducted field work on the Lebanese transnational diaspora in Australia, the US, Europe, Canada, and Venezuela. He also researches and writes in social theory, particularly the works of Pierre Bourdieu. Ghassan grew up in Beirut, moved to Sydney in 1976 at the age of 20, and before coming to Melbourne as the New Generations Professor, he held posts at UTS, the University of Sydney. He's also been visiting professor at the Pierre Bourdieu Research Centre in Paris, the American University of Beirut, the University of Nanterre, Paris 10, the University of Copenhagen, and Harvard universities. He divides his time between Melbourne, Sydney, and Paris. Lucky fellow. His books include the acclaimed and much discussed White Nations, Fantasies of White Supremacy in a Multicultural Society, Against Paranoid Nationalism, Searching for Hope in a Shrinking Society. That won the Community Relations Commission Award in the New South Wales Premier's Literary Awards in 2004. And as editor, he was editor of Arab Australians Today. Another book, Force, Movement, Intensity. This is an incredible title. Force, Movement, Intensity, the Newtonian Imagination in the Humanities and Social Sciences. And a book called Responsibility. And forthcoming will be Alter Politics, Critical Thought, and Radical Imagination. Now, he's written many articles for journals and chapters in books, and I'm pleased that two of those chapters appeared in books that I edited and that emerged from previous series in the Wednesday lecture series. They're called Multiculturalism and the Ungovernable Muslim, and that was in a book called Muslims and Multiculturalism, and Against Narcissistic Victimhood in Gaza. Against Narcissistic Victimhood, and that was in a book called Gaza, Morality, Law and Politics, which was in response to the invasion of Gaza in 2008. And as I prepared these notes, I remembered that I had written a blurb for Ghassan's book, Against Paranoid Nationalism, and I read it, and I rather liked it, and I thought I'd read it out to you. We need books like this, whether he's writing about hope, the dispossession of Indigenous peoples, collective responsibility, national identity, and what it means to be an immigrant or suicide bomber. Ghassan Hage makes one think hard. Speaking for myself, he's exposed assumptions I didn't know I held and enabled me to appreciate possibilities I had not seen before. In a voice distinctively his own, Hage speaks in many tones, analytical, polemical, caustic, ironic, compassionate. Few writers engage so uncompromisingly the whole of oneself, and for that reason, Hage can be profoundly unsettling. Few people will not sometimes disagree with him seriously and the many levels of mind, feeling, and character that are needed to respond fully to his call to rise with him to the challenge of trying to understand the many forms of our shared humanity. And by the same token, few people will not thank him for it. And I'd say the same today, only more so. So, welcome, Ghassan.
Thank you very much, Ray. And So the title, the de-cosmopolitanisation of democracy, I'm supposed to talk about this, and I'm supposed to also touch on democracy in the Middle East. And I will try. It's one of those titles where someone asks you to give a paper and you say, okay, this is what's in my imagination at the moment, which will get me going. So I hope I can still talk about it. I think as I tried to construct this paper, I circled and danced around it rather than really fully confront it. But I hope I can sort of like help think that concept of de-cosmopolitanization as I go through my paper. I will be, it's really not a kind of like what I would call a coherent paper. I'm really trying to think as this. I'm still thinking it, and I would lie to if I could say I can give you sort of like some neat, beautiful discourse about what I'm trying to think. I am trying to think through what does it mean to be committed to act as a democrat in the world today, and what space is available for you to act in an interconnected world. And I can't, and one of the things I want to emphasize is that I want to start very strongly talking about democracy and what I think are developments in the state of democracy in the West. But because I don't think one can think democracy anywhere without thinking about colonialism and the way colonialism is reshaping itself in the world today, hand in hand with the internal reshaping of modes of democratic existence. And the first thing that I want to do is really probably annoyingly intellectual and professorial, because I'm trying to develop this paradigm of thinking, and I'm going to inflict a bit of it on you, because it's sort of like that's how I'm training myself to think at the moment, and I want to think it with you. And it's an important thing for me because it involves how to build a distinctively anthropological approach, not just to democracy, but to many things. But it is about saying that thinking about democracy, even sometimes within anthropology, has a kind of like been colonized by political science, social theory type. And I want to try and think democracy as I think one can capture it as it is lived in its complexity. So what I'm trying to develop here, I hope that doesn't immediately put you off, but already you've seen it, so you haven't left, so that's okay. That's one good sign. So what I'm trying to talk about here is what I call modes of human existence. And this is, if any of you know theory, by the way, because I do interact a bit with the work of Latour, this is a concept which comes before Bruno Latour's book, Modes of Existence. And it's not trying to, so it's not an echo of his work, if you are into theory. So modes of human existence for me are modes of human relationality. And these are modes of human relationality that anthropology, in particular, has highlighted in its history. And a crucial thing for us is that these modes of human existence that anthropology has highlighted by going and saying, this is how tribe A in Papua New Guinea lives, or this is how tribe B in the Amazon lived. What I want to emphasize, it was never done with a sense of, look what the others do, and this is what we do. It was most often than not, in fact, done with a far more critical spirit, as I will try to show. That is, it was done in a spirit, look what they do. Why is it that what they are doing speaks to us? Maybe it is because part of us is like this. And so, although anthropology goes to capture modes of living that are other, but in fact, as I try to argue, it always, at its critical edge, works like an archaeology of our life. That is, it digs out modes of living that are not dominant among us, but are nonetheless existent. And in that sense, help make them salient. And so, what I'm then trying to emphasize very specifically here is that the three modes of human existence, the domestication mode of existence, which is the dominant mode of existence in our modernity, and with which we are most familiar with, and it's the mode of the dominance of instrumental reason, individuality, sense of sovereignty. And I've got here a line sort of like various criteria just to help you think these modes of existence. So forms of solidarity based on you are like me and together we are one. This notion of sameness and all ideas of solidarity in that mode of existence are based on oneness. We should be together, we should be united, we should be, etc., etc. All the discourses that emphasize oneness come from this perspective. Then there's forms of othering, all kind of otherness. So I exist in the world and everything that other is an otherness for me. That is, it is there for me to instrumentalize. It exists for me. I extract value from it. I extract things from it. It exists for me. I treat it as existing for me. Now, form of racism in this mode is often linked to negative valorization. That is, you're not valuable. You're not valuable. Piss off. This is the kind of like instrumental categorization that racism is involved in, that comes from this form of existence. And the institution that most saliently has its roots in this mode of existence is the state. And this is what we are all familiar with when we speak about democracy, the state, a kind of contract with the state. We give some of our power to the state, and the state will this kind of like contractual relation. But I think from an anthropological perspective, it is the other two modes of existence which play the most critical role, in the sense of like these are modes of existence that anthropologists from the beginning of the discipline have highlighted as existing elsewhere, but we always with a sense that they are speaking to us critically. And the first mode of existence, I argue, is the reciprocal mode of existence. Very much developed, especially in the work of Marcel Mauss on the gift, in which he shows the role of reciprocity in society, the role of gift exchange, how societies are organized around gift exchange, how societies are organized as a desire to have relations of gift exchange. And so here we can see that the dominant culture is not individual but relational. The most important thing, as many anthropologists emphasize in their study of this, what is important is the relation. So you don't give a gift for instrumental reason. You do, of course, but another aspect of the gift which is important is you give to maintain the relation. It is the relation which is the crucial center of this mode of existence. Here the border is not, the problematic of the border is not a problematic of sovereignty, but rather a problematic of it being the line where exchange happens. And the solidarity that emerges in gift societies is a solidarity based on the coexistence of difference, not about oneness, sameness and oneness. The problematic is not how to be one, but rather how do I continue to exist with you? You being who you are, me being who I am, we have to exist. So gift exchange is that problematic of coexistence, of maintaining individuality while having a relation. That problematic. So here forms of otherness are otherness as gift, otherness that is what I call with and before me. That is, I am here not to be, so the other is not an instrumental otherness. The otherness is actually a gift, a giftness. Whether it is a person or a tree, or a dog, or anything, everything, religious thought, Christian thought even talks a lot about this idea of the giftness of things and how you develop gratitude just from a sense of acknowledging the giftness of life. And so it's about the giftness of life, that everything that pops up is supposed to bring into you the reaction, not how do I use you, but rather thank you for appearing for me. Let me return the gift of your existence. And so here there is a form of racism which is not linked about valorizing negatively, but precisely about negating that giftness. That is, your appearance does nothing to me. Go away. It's a very different thing to say, I have no use for you, which is a negative valorization, and saying your presence means nothing to me. It does not. So unlike a welcome that you make, hello, thank you for being here, your sheer sort of the best way to think about giftness of presence is to think how we react to little kids when they enter a room. Sort of like, we don't wait for them to actually carry some gift for us. The moment they appear, everyone goes, wow, wow, etc. Amazing. It's your very presence is a gift for us. Thank you very much for existing. And so that mode of giftness is actually a kind of like circulates around the world, but people don't extend it in the same way. And racism is precisely the point here of not extending it at all. And here, political institution has been not the state, but norms of reciprocity. Laws sometimes, but not by the state. Laws and modes of coexistence, rules of behavior, how to give the gift, how to receive, how to give back, etc. The third mode, let me before going into this, just to make sure you capture the importance of this reciprocal mode And as I'm trying to say here, and I repeat just to hammer the point, I'm not saying there is a domestication mode of existence here, a reciprocal mode of existence here, and the mutualist existence here. I'm saying if we are to understand life as process, we have to see how these modes of existence are constantly intermingled with each other. And even if one of them is more pronounced in our lifetime, it doesn't mean that the others are not there working their ways through us and giving shape to our existence. And so the political importance of gift exchange has been well established in anthropology in its relation to theories of the state. And I just want to read this long quote, but I think it's quite significant for anyone interested in democracy and hasn't been exposed to anthropology. It's from Marshall Salin, Stone Age Economics, and his political reflection on the gift. He says, for the war of every man against every man, Mauss substitutes the exchange of everything between everybody. This is Marcel Mauss' work on the gift and showing how gift exchange was circulating. He was a new version of the dialogue between chaos and covenant, transposed from the explication of political society to the reconciliation of segmentary society. The essai sur le don is a kind of social contract for the primitives. Like famous philosophical predecessors, most debates from an original condition of disorder, in some sense given and pristine, but then overcome dialectically. As against war, exchange, not the state. The transfer of things that are in some degree persons and of persons who are in some degree treated as things, such is the consent at the base of organized society. The gift is alliance, solidarity, communion, in brief, peace, the great virtue that earlier philosophers, Hobbes notably, had discovered in the state. But the originality and the verity of Mauss was exactly that he refused the discourse in political terms. The first consent is not to authority or even to unity. It would be too literal in interpretation of the older contract theory to discover its verification in nascent institutions of chieftainship. The primitive analog of social contract is not the state, but the gift. The gift is the primitive way of achieving the peace that in civil society is secured by the state. Where, in the traditional view, the contract was a form of political exchange, most saw exchange as a form of political contract. The famous total prestation is a total contract described to just this effect in the Manuel d'Ethnographie. So the idea that Mauss is bringing to life is that gift exchange was a mode of creating coexistence between people who could be at war, but instead engage, if you like, in gift exchange. And so what I would want to emphasize here is that I don't think we can understand democracy as it exists today without understanding that despite the fact that we always think it in relation to the state and in relation to state democracy, that this modality of gift exchange still exists and permeates our social life and helps sustain, in some ways, the democracy related to the state that we, as we understand it. The third mode of existence, which is what we call the mutualist mode of existence, which is actually a word also used by Marshall Salin, but which comes really from a very interesting moment early in the history of anthropology, in the work of someone called Lucien Lévy-Bruhl, who was working with Amazonian material. And I'll quickly, sort of like describe this because it's interesting, but we have to move on. But what happened is, before there was professional anthropologists, there was always these pre-anthropological ethnographers who used to circulate in the world. And this German guy who was circulating in the Amazon was interacting with a tribe known as the Bororos. And in the process of trying to talk to them, one of the guys from the Bororos says to him the equivalent of, "We Bororos are araras." And araras is a type of bird that existed in the jungle. So basically the guy was saying, we tribespeople are birds. And so the German guy sort of like took it, and there were discussions around it. And the first batch of discussion was around the fact that they must mean it metaphorically. They must mean the bird is a metaphor of what they are. Some other people are crocodile, and they're birds. Then you have a second wave of ethnographers who come and say, well, you know, now we know the language of the Bororos a bit more. Actually, they're not saying we're birds metaphorically. They're saying we're birds. And so the second batch starts making some analysis, and they say what they really mean is that when they die, their spirit moves into the bird. Good, that seems a bit more sophisticated and a little bit more exotic. But then comes a third batch of anthropologists, and say, no, they're not, they don't mean that. I'm sorry to tell you, they're saying we're birds. And this is the point where Lévi-Bruhl comes, and actually it's a very interesting moment in the history of anthropology, but also because it's one of the moments where there's a very nice discussion between Lévi-Bruhl and Husserl about what does it mean to live and think in that domain. Because Lévi-Bruhl is the first who comes and says, they're saying they're birds. If you're an anthropologist, your aim is not to try and figure out a way in which you can translate what they're saying in a way that's comfortable for your thought and make it fit somehow with your comfort zone. They're saying they're birds. Either you can get to a position where it makes sense to say, I'm a bird. That would be the anthropological thing to do. How can you move so much into the thought of someone to the extent that you can actually think what they are thinking, not reduce what they are thinking to something that is comfortable for you? And that's when Lévi-Bruhl comes up with the concept of participation. His concept of participation is that in that tribe, things existed in each other. And this mode of existence was not about me and the bird. In fact, I existed in the bird participates in my existence, and I participate in the existence of the bird. And so it's a relation of inter-existence that he tries to develop. And it is that relation which, so here the conception of borders is blurred and indistinct. It's a mode of existence where we exist in each other. And it's a form of solidarity is not really solidarity, because solidarity assumes two separate things becoming solidarity. So it's the inter-existence of difference. And here, otherness is neither an otherness for me, nor is it an otherness as gift. It is an otherness which is already in me. Now, racism in this mode is actually quite vicious, despite the fact that it's a very nice mode of existence overall. Because in this mode of existence, you can say that the life of someone makes your life, it fosters your own life. So, you know, I mean, a classic example, you're looking at a tree and you like it and you feel good. It communicates something to you. So its flourishing makes you flourish. I take my dog, as I always like to use this example when I'm talking about this, I take my dogs to the park and they're bouncing. I start feeling I'm bouncing. And so the communication of bounciness is, we take it for granted, but it's an amazing thing when you think about it. How the hell does bounciness get communicated? So this, in this modality, racism here is precisely the opposite. I sometimes call it dementor racism. After Harry Potter, the soul-sucking dementors, because it involves the idea that you think the other is going to suck your soul out of you. And people don't like even to talk about this racism because it's a particularly nasty form of racism. People are much more comfortable talking about racism that is sort of like rational and you can deal with it in nice kind of ways. So, very importantly, as we take to finish here this bit, so as Lévi-Brühl says, there is a mystical participatory mentality that is more easily demarcated and therefore more easily observable among the primitives than in our societies, but it is present in every human mind. He's never said the tribes are like this and we are like that, and that's it. This mode of participatory existence is also part of our existence. So what I'm trying myself to teach myself to think, and I'm inviting you to think with me, that anything, so including democracy or whatever, is to think it always as this multiplicity of modes of existence intermingling in order to capture their significance. If we think the dominant imaginary of the democratic nation state, we actually can see how it is this intermingling of various modalities. Whether we are talking about what in White Nation I kind of like sarcastically put as one word, democracy, tolerance, freedom of speech, as a kind of imaginary, sort of like we're all for democracy, tolerance, freedom of speech, you're not for democracy, tolerance, freedom of speech, modes. But in this imaginary, we see the importance, first of all, of oneness. We see the importance of togetherness. We see the importance of this, for instance. This is important. The way the state is imagined as a space of transformation of enmity into adversariality. That idea that what is the difference between enemies and adversaries? Roughly speaking, that adversaries agree on a game. So if you're playing Monopoly, you can have an adversary while you're playing Monopoly. If you get the person you're playing with so upset that he tears down or she tears down the game, they become enemies. They don't want to play the same game as you. And so as a state, and the democratic state has, at its best, been able always to transform enmity into adversariality. I say, come. Sort of, we disagree, but we're here together. Let's have it. Let's have something together. So this modality was crucial. And especially if you're thinking about Middle East politics, you have to think that a democratic state can never be fully democratic if it did not transform enmity into adversariality, including foreign policy. Because people always think that, so Lebanon, think of Lebanon, the Lebanese Civil War, and think as much as you want about how it was between Christians and Muslims, how it was between leftists and rightists. The fact of the matter is, none of these were the ones which led to enmity. They were always possible to resolve those within an adversarial framework. The one which could not be resolved was foreign policy. Is Lebanon with the West, or is it going to be? Is it going to be pro-Palestinian? Is it going to be sort of supportive of Arab unity, or is it going to be supportive of American policy? The Christians say, we want Lebanon this way, and they said, we want Lebanon that way. And they could never be anything but enemies at the level of foreign policy. And so the collapse of democratic institutions happened because enmity grew in the domain of foreign policy. So now, another important one, which I want to emphasize in relation to cosmopolitanism especially, is that a sense of sameness, collectivity, and togetherness was always tempered by a sense of coexisting with others. An internalization of a comparative cosmopolitan logic has always been part of the construction of, at least at its ideal, imaginary level. You know, this is what an aspiration. It's an active aspiration. That's why it's an imaginary. So this is, I treat imaginary not as cuckoo land. When I say imaginary, it means it's an existing force that people were yearning for. And indeed, so Lévi-Strauss argues that comparative thought is one of the defining features of modernity. He, in fact, argues that this comparativism constitutes a mode relativizing culture and a kind of primary vernacular anthropology, which he saw as crucial in the formation of modernity. The fact that we could compare, that we could have empathy, that we are not civilization on our own, there's other civilization exists. That was a crucial makeup of the state. Now, what's interesting, what I'm trying to get to in the process of de-cosmopolitization is precisely this process that we are seeing everywhere, where the intellectual elite, if you like, and I'm using elite not in a derogatory manner in which some Australian journalists like to use it, but these people, I mean, one of the crises that we have today is precisely how we, and I should say we here, we who have been used to describe what the nation is about, and others would vote. It's not that people couldn't vote before, but before they would vote about what we would define as what the nation is about. And we had these cosmopolitan visions of the nation. We've slowly had to adapt to these non-cosmotypes, whether we are in the US dealing with tea drinkers, or whether we're here with Palmer, or whether we are in the Arab world dealing with ISIS or I don't know what, but there are types of people who are claiming legitimacy in trying to define the nation, not about voting, just about voting. Before, and I think that's what's hard. So if you look in Egypt, at the moment when the cosmopolitan class felt that they were conducting the revolution against Mubarak, and then the Muslim Brotherhood comes and wins the election. Now, these cosmopolitans found it hard to believe that somebody else is capable of defining what the nation ought to be like. In the same way, we find it hard to believe that someone like Palmer or someone like Pauline Hanson before has even a legitimacy. I think we find it hard to accept that someone we consider not so sophisticated, and we look down at them intellectually, which is generalized, and we say, these punks are gonna define the nation for us, so then we vote at what they like to be the nation. It's a very hard thing to do. Before it's not that these people didn't vote. Before they left the sphere of defining the essence of the nation for us, and they voted around it, and we voted. And I think that change is quite fundamental and has been used, in fact, through its negative means, because it has positive and negative dimensions. So, in a sense, we can say that this imaginary of the democratic state was thriving for as long as we can say that in the ascendant era of Western colonialism, because in that ascendant era, this imaginary of the state was a credible aspiration. It doesn't mean people got to it. Indeed, Western colonialism always played games of, come on, try to be this, you cannot be this. Or describing oneself as exactly what the imaginary is. So there were these games. But what is crucial is that it was considered a viable imaginary and a viable aspiration in the period of Western expansion, even colonial expansion. And people tried to emulate it. I think today, in the period of what we call post-modernity, but which also, I don't know if you feel like debating this, but to me it's quite certainly it's an era of Western decline. In this period of decline, we are seeing this imaginary shrinking. And in fact, I think Zygmunt Bauman says something quite interesting in relation to this. He says that in modernity, the West projects to the third world an image of its future. And the idea is that all these third world countries were aspiring for this kind of imaginary. They saw, we want to be this. But Zygmunt Bauman says, but in post-modernity, the relation is reverse. It is, in fact, the third world that is showing the first world an image of its future. And I think there's a lot of truth in this, and that's what I want to talk about a bit now. First, just in the form of chit-chat, I think I've always noticed, like 10 years ago I wrote actually about this, that as I walk in Sydney and Melbourne, I find myself being reminded of Beirut before I left. There were, I find, increasingly social and cultural forms popping up in Sydney and Melbourne that never existed when I arrived here in 75, 76. But they existed in Beirut. Modes of display of wealth. Mode of display of wealth, not the existence of wealthy people. Sort of like that always struck me as this show-offy display of wealth was so Beiruti before. Like now it's everywhere. Like I keep thinking, oh, wow, this reminds me of Beirut, this reminds me of Beirut. So it's like modes of bourgeois existence, you know, in a sense. But more importantly, I want to deal with something linked to the structure of the democratic state. When I left Lebanon, Lebanon was considered, before the war, was considered a third world country with an underdeveloped economy because it didn't have an industrial economy. It had an economy based on banking, services, and tourism, and had no industrial base. And people used to say, this economy cannot thrive without an industry. And in fact, a lot of the cultural forms of the Lebanese bourgeoisie is linked to the fact that it is not an industrial bourgeoisie. It is a commercial, what is known as tertiary sector services, tourism, banking bourgeoisie. Today, it is the definition of advanced capitalism not to have an industrial base, and for your economy to be solely based on services, banking, tourism, blah, blah, blah. Now, there's interesting things that happen. Touristic capital, commercial capital, unlike industrial capital, industrialists need to pump most of their profit back into their industry to survive. It's a well-known economic fact. Commercial capital has a much higher surplus that doesn't need to be reinvested, and so it is used on luxury goods. Plus, merchants and bankers and etc. need to look far more shiny than industrialists do because their look is very much part of their business. So these modes, these cultural forms, which are forms of this particular form of capital, are becoming dominant everywhere. But this has affected the nature of the state too. Tertiary sector, banking, development, land development, all of these are forms of capital which require a direct access to the state. Industrial capital is known to be much more happy with a state delegated to run, so what we used to call as a relatively autonomous state. Industrialists can live with an autonomous state. Merchants, land developers, they need access to the state themselves. They start competing to have a hand in the state. And we are seeing this happening everywhere. The state is becoming far more sort of like the economic elite is re-entering the state or having a hand on increased corruption, increased deal, because that class needs parliament to legislate directly for it. And so these transformations then in the nature of capital is very much, to me, the third world having shown the first world an image of its future. But what I want to get to, with the help of Agamben, is what I consider one of the crucial domains, which is the vacation of the politics, the vacation of the political. Not vacation, well, it's gone on a vacation, definitely. The political is gone on a vacation, that's in a sense. I think this bit, I know I'm using long quotes, but not many, I hope. But I think this is really, really crucial. Starting with Westphalia Treaty, the great absolutist European states begin to introduce in their political discourse the idea that the sovereign has to take care of his subjects' security. But Quesnay is the first to establish security, sûreté, as the central notion in the theory of government. And this is in a very peculiar way. One of the main problems government had to cope with at the time was the problem of famine. Before Quesnay, the usual methodology was trying to prevent famines by the creation of public granaries and forbidding the exportation of cereals. Both these measures had negative effects on production. Quesnay's idea was to reverse the process. Instead of trying to prevent famines, he decided to let them happen and to be able to govern them once they occurred, liberalizing both internal and foreign exchanges. We should not neglect, Agamben says, the philosophical implications of this reversal. It means an epoch-making transformation in the very idea of government, which overturns the traditional hierarchical relation between causes and effects. Since governing the causes is difficult and expensive, it is more safe and useful to try to govern the effects. I would suggest that this theorem by Quesnay is the axiom of modern governmentality. The ancien regime aimed to rule the causes, modernity pretends to control the effects. And this axiom applies to every domain, from economy to ecology, from foreign and military politics to the internal measures of police. I think this idea that government today is a government of effects, not causes, simply concentrate on this, has incredible ramifications. It has ramifications in the sense of the welfare state. The essence of the welfare state was looking for causes. Why people are poor? Let's deal with why people are poor. Why there's more women sort of like who are not getting top jobs. It was, welfare state is always a sociological program. You need sociological knowledge. You need knowledge of why things are caused in order to deal with them. So when the state starts saying, I don't care why, I just want to deal with effect. I don't care why people are refugees. I just want to deal with the fact that they're coming and how I handle them. I don't care why prisoners are committing crime. All I want to care is how I deal with the prisoner. Notice the shrinking of the social imaginary here. In fact, if somebody commits a crime today and you try to venture into a social explanation, you get every single right-wing commentator coming at you, laughing at you, and telling you, give us another sob story, please. We don't want to know about why they did this. The fact is they did it. And so the handling and concentration on a politics of effect is part of the process of de-cosmopolitanisation, because it is a decoupling, uncoupling of government and social knowledge. And it links very much to our institution, our university. The fact is, nobody has any use for us anymore. And the government, forget it. So this idea that we don't want social knowledge anymore. It's esoteric. We want technique, we want capacity, technology to deal with this, with that. We don't want to hear social stories. We do things, as they say, we do things. We don't want to chit-chat. That's how they put it. And that is exactly sort of like, so I would say the state no longer needs intelligence in this domain. The state used to need it. Here's the second one. Capitalism, think of this in relation to the ecological domain. This is the most important. Dealing with effect as opposed to dealing with causes. We don't want to know about the causes. Too hard to think causes. We want to govern effects. But what is the consequence of this? For the first time in the history of capitalism, this is quite momentous. Capitalism is uncoupling itself from science. You have capitalists investing in anti-science for the very first time. Before, it was the Holy Alliance. Again, it is a dumbing down of the state. We don't need scientists who think this. We don't need social scientists. So all of these together produce a space where increasingly you don't need really intelligent people in a social and scientific sense to occupy. I mean, if we do a sociology of the political elite today, we can say that there is a shrinking of their intellectual capacity. And the fact of the matter is that the political itself becomes, well, as I said, it goes on vacation. What does that mean by this? There is a certain sense of, it's a bit, I'm very active on Facebook, so I have a good sense of this. Facebook can trick people into thinking it is where everything is happening, if you're not careful. If you're not careful, you can put stuff on Facebook and think the world is changing. And in fact, nothing is happening. And so there's a sense where the democratic space of freedom of speech, consultation, talking, etc., has been going Facebooking for quite a while now. That is, it generates a lot of internal chit-chat, and you can celebrate how great our democracy is because we talk and we talk and we have views, and you're allowed to talk as much as you like and whatever you say. And the fact is, it is happening there while capital security apparatus are running the show, regardless of what is happening. Think of Israel, democracy. I don't believe there's anywhere I go where people are capable of chit-chatting their way in the most radical possible way you can imagine. You sit there and think, what an amazing place. Everybody can say whatever they like, freedom, tolerance, freedom of speech, fantastic. I am yet to see any effect of this chit-chat on Israeli policy, which has been unidirectional. We see it here. We saw it in the great demonstrations we had with the Iraq War. We thought, we're going to change the world. You know, hundreds, thousands of us descended on the street. Democracy, freedom of speech, great. And they just did what they did. And so there is a constant sense then of this uncoupling that is happening. And I don't think I can have time to keep going. How much more time do you think I should take?
5 minutes.
5 minutes.
Well, okay.
Yeah.
It takes 10 minutes. No point not to just 10.
So all these processes then are part of the de-cosmopolitanisation of the space of the political. But it has its effect too in world politics and on forms of racism. And I think because of this idea of effect, of government of effect, not caring about causes, racism itself has turned into forms of exterminability. What I mean by this is that throughout the history of racism, you know, despite the many varieties of racism, you can say that there was always two tendencies. You have a racism of exploitation and a racism of extermination. That is, a racism, so slavery is a racism of exploitation. You don't see a slave owner holding a sign saying, blacks out. You know, no slave owner wants blacks out. They want the blacks in to exploit them. They don't want to eradicate them. They want to exploit them. That's a racism of exploitation. The racism of extermination is precisely here. To understand exterminability, we have to move way beyond negative valorization. We have to understand how all forms of negativity enter into the game. For someone to be exterminable, it's not enough to say, I have no use for you. There's something much more vicious about the category of extermination. And that racism of exterminability is becoming a dominant form in our lives. It is the kind of racism directed at asylum seekers. It is the same kind of racism directed at Palestinians by Zionists. It's the same mode of racism. It's a racism where I have no use for you. So people talk about Israeli apartheid, South African apartheid. But, you know, even if there is or there isn't, but there's a crucial thing. White South Africans needed black labor. Israeli society started needing Palestinian labor, but it has very quickly vacated itself from it. Roughly, I mean, there's still some, obviously, it's not absolute, but they don't need any more Palestinian labor. In fact, they bring it from elsewhere, so no need. So this kind of logic of exterminability, which I won't read this because I don't have time, you read it, and so I want to finish. I was going to talk more about Egypt, but I won't have time. I want to finish by talking about the fact that what we have today is what I called a long time ago, and now it's even more so, it's called phallic democracy. A phallic democracy, and this is a technical psychoanalytic term. A phallic democracy, that is democracy. What is the phallus? in Freud's theory. The phallus is that thing you have which you think is really important, but it's not very important at all. But it's only important because others desire it, but there's nothing there. And phallic democracy is precisely this. Phallic democracy is a democracy which is continuously about, look what I have. I have democracy. But big difference between the democracy we have and the democracy we live. And as the democracy we live is becoming, as I'm describing, shrinking, almost quasi-non-existent, the democracy we have is becoming bigger and bigger. And we keep moving it around and showing it to all these third world countries and say, look at our democracy, phallic logic, look at it, it's really big. Yours is really small. And there's nothing there. In fact, not only there's nothing there, we need people to desire it in order to convince ourselves that there is something there. And so that's why I think one of the interesting moves that we have today is you have first hordes of idiots invading the state at one level and happily coupling themselves with an equally idiotic media. And because capitalism requires and does not need intelligence anymore, they happily pump them as important. Anybody makes all sorts of like unbelievable statements, which you think, where on earth is it possible to think something like this and anybody taking you seriously? We're constantly facing the fact that, well, actually, it's taken seriously. It's just mind-boggling how so many totally ridiculous things are being taken seriously around us, and just by the power of being pumped by capital and the media. Second, you have a happy bunch of chit-chatters who are happy with continuing chit-chatting democratically without them having an effect, and happy with freedom of speech. And you have people who are searching for impact. You have radical Democrats who are searching for how can one recover a sense of having an impact in the world today, given that it's no longer through the state. That's why you find very interesting the growth of boycotts. Like I was very interested in the way the boycott of the Biennale worked, because one person wrote this fantastic article and said, that's not the intelligent thing to do. The intelligent thing for the artist to do was to use the space to make a statement. I.e., she was saying to them, don't have an impact, join chit-chat society so that we can continue to have freedom of speech and you have really interesting things to say, but which will not have an impact. This is, so the logic of boycott, the logic of occupy, all of these are searches for circumventing the flattening of democratic space. Thank you.